Is RGB finally here? It might be its time. It's one of those shadowy projects that's been on the sidelines of Bitcoin building for years and years, promising to solve a lot of the Bitcoin scale solutions, but nothing has really bubbled to the broader Bitcoin mainstream culture. You probably haven't seen anything they've done. That might change next month. The guest I have on today is working out with his team. I'm super excited about the potential for this project. So without further ado, first, what is up, you beautiful people? Welcome back to the Built on Bitcoin podcast. I'm your humble host, Jacob Brown. And today I have Hunter Beast on the podcast. Hunter is the Director of Engineering at DIBA, and he also works on the BitMask Bitcoin wallet app. So I think you're going to hear those names a lot more over the coming months. But for now, just know that DIBA is a company that makes RGB and Bitcoin tools. And the one you're going to see most importantly next month is a NFT, or what they call a unique digital asset, or a UDA marketplace, and a wallet called BitMask, which is actually really great because it supports Bitcoin L1, Lightning, RGB, Nostr. They plan on doing Ordinals in the next couple months. They just want to be the one-size-fits-all super app. It's not custodial, handling all the stuff. So really impressed with what I saw so far, because I had seen nothing from RGB up to about 2 weeks ago. So I had to get Hunter on the podcast to talk about what is RGB. I've heard this name before. I've heard this thing called client-side validation, but besides that, I know absolutely nothing. So we talk about what RGB is, this idea of client-side validation. We talk about global state, which most of you are used to, and distributed state, which RGB is built on, and a bunch of other topics. So without further ado, I bring you Hunter Beast, Director of Engineering at DIBA.
Welcome to Built on Bitcoin.
Hunter, what's up, my man? How are you today?
It's going.
Fantastic. Excited to talk with you. I recently, RGB is one of those things that's been in people's minds for a long time, but it's just kind of like, maybe you see Orlovsky giving a talk. Besides that, it's like this theoretical thing that's sometime in the future. And it wasn't until I got to try the stuff that you guys are working on at DIBA and BitMask where I was like, oh shit, this is freaking cool. So really excited to talk about RGB, Bitcoin, and wherever else this kind of conversation goes. But just to start, maybe you can give me a brief background of your background and kind of how you got into Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I actually got into it. So I didn't really start out a Bitcoiner. I'm here in Denver, and we have a large Ethereum community and a conference called ETH Denver, and I went to that just about every year. And they have a pretty decent sized meetup scene and stuff, as far as I know. Extremely strong delineations between the two, camps. This was around, and maybe I was just blind to it because I was a newcomer, but this was around 2017 or so, 2017, yeah. And so 2017, and then going into 2018, I started getting more serious about it, and I've started a Web3 startup, got into, Solidity and IPFS and all sorts of cool stuff. But a little later, I came to work for the Filecoin protocol, and this is around 2021 or so. And, I had my head in decentralized storage for quite a bit through a couple different avenues, and so that was kind of neat. Around that same time, I read the Bitcoin Standard, and it just kind of fast-forwarded some thinking that I had been doing, and a lot of things fell into place, and kind of like already began like my journey into Bitcoin maximalism, but like this kind of cemented it. And so it's safe to say at this point, like, I mean, well, not at this point, like when I first saw RGB, I was like, we don't need anything else. Like, if we already have payments through Lightning and have other ways to scale it, then really all we just need is smart contracts functionality, and then we've got pretty much everything we need from, the Bitcoin time chain. And so like the minute I understood RGB, that was like a big orange pilling moment for me. That was maximalism for me. Like that was like, if we don't need anything else, then we're good.
Got it. And what I think you said 2021 you were working on Filecoin. So when did you get like RGB pilled?
That was around the same year. And I came to talk to Gideon Weze at DIBA later that year. He's a CEO. And I also was following Jose Diego Robles' work. He was working with the earliest versions I'd seen of RGB at the time, which was version 0.4. It was a very different project back then, a lot less mature. But one thing that I knew is that I wanted to be a part of it. And, it's one of those things where like, I saw its potential and I saw it was early on. And I just knew that I was like, oh, this could be the next big thing. And so I put a lot of time, invested a lot of time and energy into understanding it and working in it. And as soon as I was able, I came up to Gideon and in February of 2022 and said, hey man, I'd love to work for you. I'd love to help you with build Bitmask and integrate RGB tech. And he was like, yeah, right on, let's do this. And so I've been there ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah, I got to connect with Gideon yesterday. We had a brief call, and that dude's a beast. I'm very impressed with the team I've seen so far. I want to jump into RGB, but I want to poke on like the reasons why a little bit more just for a second, because there's so much. Bitcoin is so fractured because everyone's trying different bets to solve different problems. So Lightning is peer-to-peer, kind of off-chain scaling. You have the L1, Ordinals is this new thing, and then you have all these different kind of side chains doing different mechanisms. And then RGB is this client-side thing, although it sounds like you're about to push back on something.
Well, I wouldn't call it fractured so much as like, I mean, to see it as fractured would be like seeing, the rest of Web3 is fractured, right? Like, I mean, thinking of, trying to remember the name, Binance Smart Chain, Polygon, Avalanche, Phantom, the scale, EVM compatible scaling layers, right? Like, or chains. And so there's of course Arbitrum and like a few other like projects that like you could kind of imagine as kind of maybe taking away development energy from Ethereum. And so like I don't know if I would say like Bitcoin is fragmented so much as it has a similar amount of energy to all the rest of Web3. Like there's just so much going on that like, I mean, it seems like there's fragmentation, but like also we have to remember, less than maybe 1% of the world is using Bitcoin for everything. And so like until we're using more, like substantially more, I mean, we really shouldn't be considering ourselves terribly in competition with each other. Like, I mean, I'll definitely snipe at people on Twitter, like at people I see as like rivals, but that's just to like keep my own energy up. That's how I work. I'm a bit more competitive that way. The one of the most energizing things is for Udi Wertheimer to come into a thread and just throw some shade, say like RGB isn't a thing. I'm like, well, fuck you, I'll make it a thing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Point taken. So I should clarify. In the crypto space more broadly, if you have MetaMask and Solidity, you get crazy coverage across chains and user experience, like onboarding, and that's not the case in Bitcoin. We have different wallet protocols. You have different programming languages, and that fractures the focus of both the onboarding and the dev experience. So that's what I mean by fracturing. So there's a decision to be made by a developer to build an ecosystem and learn, say, Rust, for example, which gives you more and more coverage by the day, it seems like. But if you're going to Stacks, you're learning Clarity, and if you're going to Rootstock, you're learning Solidity. And so, like, going deep down a certain rabbit hole over indexes if that ecosystem pops, versus, okay, now rootstock is taking off. I got to, if I'm going to be value accretive to Bitcoin, I should probably go learn Solidity as well. Like, do you think that's a fair point? And then if so, yeah, I'm curious about like building on RGB versus Lightning, which has been hot for a while, etc.
Yeah. Definitely RGB and Lightning are solving different problems, and I think they're complementary. One thing you mentioned earlier was just, the like MetaMask as being like kind of like this maybe Schelling point across the Web3 ecosystem. And I think a major part of that is EIP 1193, which is the Web3 provider API. And so that essentially injects the Ethereum window object into the browser window and allows JavaScript developers, web developers to just latch onto that and say, hey, I'd like, some connectivity to a wallet and be able to sign a transaction and when I need to and detect what network they're on, that kind of thing. That's something that does not exist in Bitcoin. And one thing that also kind of parallels this was the early work on color coins. One thing is Jimmy Song, he was kind of like an early contributor to the color coin projects, at least one of them. And he, I met him recently. He explained to me there was like about 5 or 6 different even on-chain protocols for colored coins at that time, around 2013. Many different, approaches to solving that problem of tokens, essentially alternate units of account on Bitcoin. He did a retrospective in 2017 or so as to why the colored coin movement perhaps failed. And he gave 3 reasons. One was that it was just a little bit before its time. People didn't quite know the utility. 2 was like there wasn't enough marketing because, it's not like people had figured out how to pre-mine 72 million ETH, to finance a foundation. The third most salient point, I think, was the fact that there wasn't enough standardization between the protocols. And so since there wasn't standardization, there was definitely like a fragmentation user experience, a fragmentation in developer energy. And that is one thing I think RGB did help with. They did address, is they created a standards organization and they very explicitly laid out these standards that they tried to, these on-chain standards, these contract standards, and they just tried to, get everybody on the same page in terms of standardization and intercompatibility. That's incredibly valuable because we already have maybe, I would say 4 or 5 different companies now using RGB technology, and if we were all, just building different tech, that would be a massive fragmentation in its own right. So I feel like RGB is definitely like gathering, a lot of really talented, brilliant developers and development energy, and the standards have helped focus that and just kind of gather a lot of kind of the direction between where setting the intention and where the protocol should go. Do we have anything like EIP 1193? Not yet. However, there are people working on the WebBTC and WebLN standards. There's definitely a coordination happening behind the scenes between, like Leather Wallet and just a few other wallet developers. Like we're collaborating with them, and we're trying to figure out how to develop this standard, how to standard, because that is something we're definitely wanting to work towards. And Web3 does set kind of the standard for this, right? They've had a ton of money, they've had a ton of development energy, they've had a ton of time to iterate and find maybe the best thing that could work for them and the best solutions, at least for them. I mean, maybe, the MetaMask experience isn't always ideal, and maybe that can be improved upon, but it definitely is like a bar that we should at least meet, right? And so that's something that we definitely are working towards.
That's really good to hear. That's That's one of those things that's like unsexy stuff in the background that's like super important. It's like standard setting. I'm glad to hear like people like Leather and you guys are working towards it behind the scenes. Cool. Well, then let's jump in then. We got a lot to cover with RGB. Shout out to the cat. And so yeah, let's just start with like the highest level overview, because I think some people have heard the name. This idea of client-side validation is probably somewhat in the lexicon. And then beyond that, I don't think people know much about what RGB is. So yeah, give us the brief overview.
So RGB is a smart contracting protocol. It didn't start out that way necessarily. It was, kind of a continuation of the color coins lessons and thinking. Dr. Maxim Orlovsky, he came in and he was able to add his perspective to the project, and it expanded in scope and capability, and now it's just a generalized smart contracting protocol, and complete with its own virtual machine called ALUVM. That is something that runs within wallets. A good way to conceptualize the way RGB works is it's a kind of a fat wallet model. So there's no like kind of really necessarily RGB node per se. I mean, there could be if you wanted it to, but it doesn't have to be built that way, and it's not built by that way in Bitmask. It really is kind of like a self-custody, cold contract, cold wallet design and architecture. We think that is very valuable from like not just a privacy and self-sovereignty standpoint, but also a security standpoint, because you don't have to worry about your contract being hacked overnight, because if your wallet's offline, if you're, just you don't have your signer connected or whatever, then there's no way for it to be compromised without you being there. Ever since the beginning with the EVM, you've seen, with the DAO hack, and then on, with these smart contracts hacks that are on chain, they're essentially these big like hot wallets that multiple parties can permissionlessly make use of, and it really could. I mean, those are big honeypots in a sense. We're basically taking what's usually in one contract and we're distributing the state of the contract into each individual, and they have just the contract, the part of the contract that concerns just them and their peers, and really like the individuals who've had it before. You kind of need a kind of a chain of custody, at least until we have zero knowledge proofs that could help collapse chain history like that. But it really is kind of like distributed state rather than global state. And so it's a way to scale smart contract execution off chain within the wallet itself, built on top of Bitcoin, UTXOs. So you don't need like another, like people say like a gas token. Well, I just call it a fee token. Fees. You don't pay fees in any other token than Bitcoin. It's the base protocol. I think that's also a big selling point from like a user experience perspective. It does make it more analogous to the Ethereum experience, where you have the base protocol money that's also could be used as the digital oil to power world computer contracts, to use old rhetoric from that, my time in the community. I think there's a lot of value to just staying Bitcoin only for paying for fees and helping, miners pay their bills, but also being good stewards of the time chain. So we're not, making a bunch of UTXOs willy-nilly. One thing that's kind of also nice, as kind of like, maybe this is a segue into Ordinals and also BRC20, there's this concept of UTXO in Bitcoin that basically it's like a pile of money for your listeners who don't always know what a UTXO is. And it's just like a pile of Bitcoin that could be spent. It's owned by someone, and once it's spent, it can't be spent again. There has to be a new UTXO now that holds that money. And so what's interesting is they have a fair amount of overhead from like a node database perspective, and it's not good to like bloat the UTXO set unnecessarily. And so one thing that we do at DIBA is we put all the tokens on a single UTXO. that's something you can't really do with Ordinals, because the way that Ordinals works, the base protocol perspective, not necessarily like speaking of the meta protocols, but the base protocol of Ordinals is that the first sat is inscribed, right? Or like you pick a sat point that is inscribed with a inscription, and so that is part of the UTXO. The sat point is part of the out point, and an out point is a way to indicate or describe a specific UTXO within a transaction. And what's neat about RGB is that we can kind of batch tokens onto a single UTXO, and not just batch, but settle on them. And but that said, I use the word batch because that's something that we're working on right now for Bitmask, is the capability to batch multiple token transfers onto a single UTXO spend, so that if you do multiple transfers before the block is mined, you only pay one fee, even though you're paying multiple different people, who could spend those tokens afterwards. So we like to think that helps scale Bitcoin in some ways too. So
I want to take it back high level for a second, because I want to make sure people grok as much as they can with this. So that you say it's a smart contract platform or protocol. I'm not sure what word you used. So that kind of puts it mentally in the space of what Liquid, Rootstock, Stack are trying to do as far as like extending use cases for Bitcoin. And then you use this word fat wallet, which does help me kind of understand it, which is, well, it comes to mind in a couple of ways. One is that, is the wallet actually like size bigger on my computer? And then two is the resource demand on a fat wallet or a Bitmask wallet, for example, is it more intensive for the user compared to what they're used to with a Leather or XYZ wallet?
yeah, it is. It probably is. We are working on some tech that should hopefully alleviate some of that. It's definitely doing more. It's definitely like a lot more data. There's wallet addresses for it to track, that sort of thing. Hopefully it's not too noticeable for the user. We use Rust, so yeah, and WebAssembly, so it should hopefully be a bit more optimized than, if it was entirely written in JavaScript or something, In some ways, also, it could be faster because a lot of stuff is happening locally. If it doesn't have to reach out to the server for everything, like to check your token balance, that kind of thing, you just kind of know from the contracts that you have what tokens you have. Then in some ways it might even be faster, but like compared to, other protocols that use tokens, but it depends. It really is like a complicated question, actually.
Well, it's interesting because it's making me think of two things. One is like when you use Bitmask, the transactions are fast because it's basically instant. Like the UDA is created instantly. The funding was really quick. So this idea of like sending in transaction with a blockchain paradigm, you're used to 10, 20, whatever minute block times. But then the other one is like, and this is more of the thing that we're touching on right now, is the load on the person's computer, which kind of brings in this idea of like, you want a Bitcoin node to be easy to run so that you can get maximum decentralization. So I'm assuming that running this wallet, like if you have any computer from the past 15 years, like it's still going to be powerful enough to run it, right? Like it's not adding that much more load to the average user's computer, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, it should be like on par with other browser extensions. If you have any like password managers, for example, they probably have a similar amount of WebAssembly code. I know that 1Password actually is written in Rust, a lot of large portions of it anyway. If you have no trouble running, 1Password or other browser extensions that are like it, then it's not always checking things in the background necessarily. It's only when it's open, when it's running. So we try our best to make it as optimal and performance optimized as we can, because we're total nerds about that kind of stuff. DIBA, Rust developers generally are. We try to get a few more microseconds.
Okay, yeah. Doesn't sound like that would be a blocker then. Okay, that's good to know. Then the other thing you mentioned that I want to hit on is, in every other paradigm, we're used to this idea of global state. It's just the way the blockchains work. We want to be able to have global state so we know there's verifiable truth. My coins are on the ledger somewhere. And then you mentioned distributed state is the RGB paradigm. So talk to me a little about how these are different, some of the trade-offs, Because if everyone's used to the global state idea, this distributed state is not something that we're going to be used to.
I think one of the bigger like culture shock moments is like the absence of a block explorer. There's no blocks involved. There's like the only blocks are the ones that Bitcoin uses for settling the single-use seals that are essentially used in client-side validation. We haven't really got into that much, but that's like kind of inner workings of RGB. But basically, when you spend a UTXO, RGB will make metadata for that UTXO that describes what happens to the contract when it's spent, and that's called a state transition. It's sort of a cryptographic commitment to that UTXO that is then broken when you spend it, and then you know there's new state and that is changed, and it's being changed by someone who owns it. So it's all really like valuable security model stuff for us to benefit from Bitcoin's own security model. And as far as global state and distributed state, so how that comes back to distributed state is you just keep track of the contract data that you're involved in. The seal component that's on chain that's the only portion that you can actually see on a block explorer like mempool.space. Like we do provide a transaction ID for you to go and be able to look at what your transaction looks like on chain. But that said, it shouldn't look any different from any other Taproot transaction because we don't really use it for containing information necessarily, other than just that the information is that you spent it. And so that's really how the protocol works. And then the rest of the contract information is stored off chain, and we end-to-end encrypt it in a format called Carbonado that is uses wallet keys that are generated by the wallet itself to store the data and be able to verify it exists remotely. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole. So that's how we kind of answer the question of data availability and how a user will be expected to, be able to self-custody their contract data at some point, and how we make multiple copies. So we have redundant backups, and then we have client-side backups, and there's also the inner workings of how we reconcile, the different differences in state between all those different sources of truth. But yeah.
One thing that comes to mind is this is showing my ignorance of the technical side, but is DeFi harder in a distributed state paradigm then? Because if I look at how global state DeFi works, like because they have a block time, they can have a consensus of what the current pool is and how much volume is going through it, and then the block explorers and these indexers can then pull data, and then people can adjust what they're doing, and so it becomes this flywheel of actions. And when I look at like Lightning, for example, and like what Collider is doing, they're trying to do a peer-to-peer exchange, and to solve for that problem, they do it in like funding rounds. So it becomes a quasi-block time. You can do whatever you want, we batch it up, and then we execute them, and then we repeat the process. Is that that's one of their design decisions? Is this fundamentally more difficult in a distributed state paradigm of doing things like DeFi and AMMs and these kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be different solutions for that kind of stuff, and it won't be a canned solution for you to reach for that other people have done. And so is it more difficult? Likely yes. You can get this to work, but it really is kind of like a superset of functionality. Like you could get this to work like an ordinary blockchain node and get a bunch of centralized global state on that node, but it's not designed to work like it's designed to work so much to do so much more than that. And so and because it can, people use it that way because it's so much more useful, because then you don't have the problem of fees for contract execution. The reason Ethereum has the gas fee model, which differs from Bitcoin's fee model, which is based on bytes on chain. Gas is a unit of computation, whatever computation units are. I know how big a byte is. I don't know what a computation unit is. But regardless, we have this nebulous idea of computation that we're charging for, and it's really there to solve a problem in computing that you can't solve it without a source of verifiable scarcity, like with money. And that problem is the halting problem, the way that Ethereum solves for this is just making it so that you have a limited amount of time for that contract to execute before it stops. That is determined by how much you pay for the contract to execute. And the way RGB kind of gets around this problem is it just does that computation in your wallet. And so if it's just between you and your peer paying each other, there's no real incentive necessarily to DDoS each other. And so if you're not like just executing a bunch of contracts willy-nilly, then you should be fine from like a DDoS standpoint. And so you would be affected, nobody else would be affected. So it's also like less of a, I would just say win, like it doesn't get the attacker much. By distributing the problem, you're able to solve these other problems in a more elegant way.
That makes perfect sense. And that definitely solves a lot of incentives around trying to abuse the system, because you're just abusing yourself if you do it in the wrong way. Perfect. Makes sense. Okay, I want to jump into the things you guys are building, but one more nuance I want to touch on, make sure that people understand this. Because, again, go back to global state. You have this idea of like your stuff is stored somewhere else by some miner, by some nodes. Maybe you're running your own node, but it's out there kind of being held by some other person for the average Bitcoiner. And so the private key can like unlock when you want to move it, for example. But in this distributed systems, like where is everything stored? Because there's just an open question there of like where's my NFT or UDA stored? If it's in cold storage, like how is the data availability? So like how are some of these things different?
I touched on that a little bit with Carbonado. That's how we solve for it at DIBA. Other wallets might solve for it using Storm, which is an RGB project. RGB actually has a number of really, really cool useful projects. Storm is a decentralized storage protocol, a node in a database, whereas Carbonado is just kind of like a file format encoding, but it's able to accomplish the same problem, like of just keeping the data in a secure way. There's also some other really cool projects they have, like Prometheus, which is verifiable computing, which is also very exciting, leads into some stuff on Prime. Hopefully we can talk about Prime a little bit if you don't mind. But getting back to data availability, where's the data kept? It's just kept in files, and it could be kept. So we keep them on our servers. We have a contract with Hut 8, and we have a couple different servers. We save to 2 different servers at the same time, plus to the device locally. And we use this thing called a conflict-free replicated data type, which is very fancy data structure that is capable of reconciling differences between different sources of truth. Definitely, like, data availability is always going to be you have to kind of solve for yourself. Ultimately, it's like bring your own storage kind of thing from an RGB perspective, from a protocol perspective. We also have worked out a deal with Start9 that we're really excited about. So Start9, they make these really, really slick Bitcoin nodes, all kinds of like self-hosted software that you can set up pretty easily. And it's a hardware device you can buy, and they're hoping to be one of the first wallets to land in their marketplace as like a fully integrated self-hosted Bitcoin wallet. It's a web wallet, and we want to integrate it with all the services that Start9 supports. And so what's kind of interesting about Bitcoin is it's like some people see it as more fragmented, but I just see it as more distributed, decentralized, that kind of thing. Whereas like Ethereum might have 1 or 2 or I think just maybe 2 implementations of the base protocol that, all the different accounts stuff is integrated all into the same, CLI and all the same daemon program process. You have kind of these separate layers of abstraction in the Bitcoin world. It's just a lot of different energy and a lot more, like, how would you say, people solving different the same problem in different ways. And I think that's actually really valuable from a security standpoint. What's neat about Bitcoin, it being so, I would just say, kind of bare bones, is kind of like it really is like a tabula rasa in many ways to like a blank slate for developers to work on. It allows us to come up with creative solutions in different ways than we could have imagined even a decade ago.
I love it. Yeah, I'm a big believer too. I like the the constraints breathe creativity, so it makes you think differently about that. And it's refreshing to hear where data availability is kind of you have to bring your own device at a core level if you want to make sure that it's yours. Because it's not something we think about when you're buying your NFTs. You're just like, I own it and I own it forever. But, Ordinals kind of has something like this, but you're paying absurd prices byte for byte. And then you have things like Arweave, which have who knows how long the tokenomics will work, and everything in between. So, as you said, that the best way to do it is to, run a node like a Start9 device and make sure that your right-click saved on your local device.
That's right. And we want to make that easy with the technology we're building. And I actually did the calculation, the cost benefit of when would I break even, for how many years in the future would I break even if I were to store my, JPEG on the Bitcoin time chain versus just keep it for a month in S3. And byte for byte at a fee rate of 10, I think it's 10 or 20 sats per VByte, it's a billion times more expensive than S3. And in addition, so cloud storage, right? And so in addition, it would take about 10,000 years to break even. And that's just assuming that, and that's assuming that Bitcoin's price never appreciates. So otherwise it would be the heat death of the universe. And so very, very few good reasons, I think, to inscribe data from for JPEGs, because some people use, it as kind of a substitute for archival. But what if, I can imagine scenarios in the future where perhaps the Bitcoin blockchain is not as necessary to keep around, to archive in full. And, there was even talk about witness pruning and that kind of thing. I don't know how effective that it, the concept of keeping your data out on 10 or 20,000, Bitcoin nodes is going to be for the years to come. And so some things we're exploring at DIBA with Carbonado is the file format. It actually has baked in a verification encoding that allows us to just reach out and ask for small subset portions of the file. And if we can get just a small piece of it, then we can verify likely that the rest of it exists. By doing that, we can verify probably 1 million times more data than needing to actually download it all over again to verify it remotely. And by doing that, we can pay remote peers for storing that data over time. But if you don't want to do that, if you want to pay for all your storage in advance, one thing we've considered is just launching it in a space. And so we've actually spoken to some people who are looking into orbital archival. And there's also the consideration that if you're willing to pay 1 billion X premium on your data to, have this archival, then, any less amount than that, is actually a good deal. And so it might make sense to launch your data into space. It might make more sense to launch your data into space than it would to inscribe it onto the Bitcoin time chain.
Interesting. I want to cover, so we've been talking for 50 minutes. I'd love to cover in the next 10, 15, Bitmask, which you guys are launching next month with DIBA. And then I'd love to touch on Prime, as you brought up a little bit earlier. So we can kind of go in that order. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about Bitmask, what you guys have built with this wallet, which is, I've used it. It's really nice.
Thank you. So it's a very ambitious wallet. Bitcoin Taproot. It's a Taproot only wallet, though we will be adding the capability to generate a SegWit address and sweep those funds into a Taproot address should you ever need it. But that'll only be for the case where an exchange is super uncooperative with being able to withdraw to your Taproot address. And heaven forbid you want to actually send from a Taproot address to an exchange. I don't know how we're going to support that. And it's just, there's this kind of like, there's always been this awkward transition time where wallets catch up to the new standard before exchanges do. And then, the exchange takes a while to, like we saw this with SegWit, and they eventually came around to it, but it took them, how many years to get SegWit going. But anyway, I'm getting in the weeds. So Taproot only, there's Nostr key generation. And so you have an npub that we were able to provide, and a username that's a NIP5 identifier, and also a lightning address, and it should also be able to send and receive zaps. We've, of course, got RGB support for RGB20 and RGB21. So RGB tokens, so we've got RGB20 is a fungible token standard, RGB21 is non-fungible. We like to call them unique digital assets, or UDAs. I feel like I'm missing stuff, but we've got a whole heck of a lot of functionality in that little wallet, and we've got a lot more planned for it too. One thing that I'm getting really close to finalizing is the capability to swap between on-chain and sats and off-chain, like Lightning sats, using DZ. That'll be hopefully like just a click of a button. You can transfer this many sats at this speed at this fee rate, and it should be relatively smooth. So a relatively smooth experience. A lot of functionality in that little wallet, and we're really proud of how smooth we've been able to get it. But it's we still have a lot more things we want to do with it, and there's a big launch for an accompanying unique digital asset marketplace that it integrates with, and so that'll be launching hopefully November 11th. That's kind of like when we expect everything to align. One other thing that we're really excited about is the capability for peer-to-peer swaps of RGB assets for on-chain Bitcoin. Yeah, and that's BitMask.
I mean, you covered a ton. I think just to rehash briefly, because this is the thing that I found really refreshing, is one of the reasons why I don't use Nostr currently is I don't want to have to manage another private key just for messaging. Like, I don't care enough. The value's not there for me. So making a BitMask, because one, I wanted to try RGB. I'm like, this looks interesting. Let me give it a shot. And then I was pleasantly surprised to know that it already supports L1, Lightning, which I was able to send sats to easily, Nostr when I want to, so I got the npub, RGB. So I'm really bullish on a wallet that crosses enough of the check marks across the big current players. The only thing you guys are missing in my mind, if I'm looking at like where the current interest is Ordinals. So like if you guys had Ordinal support, I could see you guys being a top 10 wallet pretty quickly because you already do everything else so well. Is that on your near-term roadmap, or you guys have other things that are higher priority?
It is definitely on our near-term roadmap. Right now, we're really focused on launching our marketplace, but hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have Ordinal support. And one thing I look forward to is teleburning, being able to consolidate Bitcoin transactions into RGB21 unique digital assets. So that might be fun to see how that might play within the community.
Yeah, and again, like this is something that people will have to try out once you guys go live November 11th, hopefully. But it's really surreal to have things just execute like that. Like imagine you're using Lightning for all of your stuff. It's such a weird paradigm shift when you're used to like sending out, you pay a high-ish fee and it just goes off into the ether for who knows how long. Hopefully the degens aren't going too hard trying to mint whatever new token they're trying to ape into. It's just not a problem on RGB. So, I'm really excited for people to try this stuff out. Last question I want to close on then, and you brought it up, is Prime. And I've seen the thing on Twitter a little bit, but I haven't deep dived in. It looks like it's still pretty early in its process, but it has big implications. So, yeah, talk to us about Prime.
It's one of the most exciting things on my mind right now. Like in fact, I'm so freaking excited about it because it solves kind of like this problem that always sits in the back of every Bitcoiner's mind is how are we going to scale to solve, 1 billion people's needs, 8 billion people, 10 billion people, right? One, solution for Prime that we're exploring will allow us to put over 1 million transactions into a single block. Prime is some of the applications for it that could be really groundbreaking are like with that much, scalability, and with that much at such a low resource utilization, because it really does, like, what it does is it simplifies the concept of single-use seals that RGB needs without all the overhead of a UTXO's model and script sigs and like all these, like a scripts, running inside your UTXOs, and you have the script VM and all this, like all that stuff is handled within the LU VM and client-side validation and RGB. And so if we're able to keep that off chain, then we can keep the base layer very, minimal. And so what I'm really excited about with RGB is if we can scale to 1 million transactions per block with a very low computational and space overhead and bandwidth overhead. Some of these scaling problems are actually really difficult to solve if you don't have another chain, because some things you can only do on chain. One of those things is RGB 21, like kind of NFTs essentially. They're non-fungible, so there's no liquidity in any kind of token channel you could come up with for that. Any kind of transfer has to occur on chain. They cannot really happen over a token channel. There's also swaps. The way we're doing swaps requires an on-chain component, and we think that it's probably the best way to do it in our minds, especially if we have Prime and we're kind of building towards the future. And then I think one of the third most exciting applications for Prime could be scaling the Lightning Network, because there's always like this question of like, will everybody be able to have a UTXO? Will everybody be able to have their own channels and be able to self-custody their keys and that sort of thing? And with Prime, the answer is emphatically yes. And so that all these things are very good deal. And I think that the cherry on top is that no modifications to the base protocol are needed. It is entirely permissionless, yes. Also, we can get permissionless or trustless two-way PEG, verifiable computing protocol for state channels called Prometheus that Dr. Orlovsky is working on. And when Prometheus is applied to the two-way PEG, it's used to create a protocol called Radiant. And so if you're a fan of, Isaac Asimov's Foundation, he's got Prime and Radiant. And something that I've been working with some other individuals on is, hopefully it'll be out by the time this comes out, is the ninth proof of folding. So this is kind of the way to kind of improve certain pieces of RGB that makes it, 1 million transactions per block, which is actually a lot lower than it originally started out with, but it does solve a lot of the interactivity and data availability issues that people have pointed out. For example, you would need to store 6 gigabytes of data per UTXO per year to spend your UTXOs. And also, if you missed any of the proofs within that year, then it would be unspendable. And so we think those are kind of deal breakers, and we would like to think that there are really good, elegant ways to solve those problems using Stark proofs. And that's essentially what the ninth proof of folding's proposal is solving. And so that's one of the big reasons why I'm actually really, really excited about Prime. So.
Got it. Very cool. I mean, 1 million transactions per block is like crazy moon math, so that sounds super exciting. That was my last question, but I actually got one more that popped in my head, which is that you mentioned that all of this is done without changing Bitcoin, which is amazing. Like, that's kind of the gold standard. But in that context, is there anything currently being proposed, whether it's CTV or ZK opcode or something, that bolsters RGB, or do you guys really don't need anything for Bitcoin to change to do everything that you guys are currently aiming for?
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, I used to think that Prometheus, I used to think that CTV was actually like a pretty, like something that we would actually need to make, say, custodial contracts, like contracts that could take custody of a coin. Because that is one thing that we actually do not have the capability for right now. It's more that's why I say it's more like metadata about a UTXO. It's more like an alternative unit of account. These are like contracts that are kind of different than the way EVM contracts are that can have whole, funds and have global state and that sort of thing. And RGB does have global state. You just have to do it differently. And but that said, like with Prometheus, you're able to essentially intermediate, like mediate automatically, who owns what. And so that could actually have governance applications. That allows us to make a lot of rules about how that system works, and then also delegate a lot of how that system works out to client-side validation. All that gives us a lot more flexibility in how we, like, in what we need and how we solve problems. And so, I mean, honestly, I would recommend, at this point, I'm so focused on like solving these problems without needing changes to Bitcoin. Maybe we can, explore these avenues first before, reaching for the big guns,
Cool, man. Well, we covered an absolute ton in this conversation. Is there anything that I didn't touch on? Any closing thoughts you wanna leave for the people?
I think there's two things. One is I've never been more bullish on the development energy in Bitcoin. We've been doing a lot of, just the hard work in the back end to not just develop new stuff, but also train the next generation of Bitcoin developers. I'm actually going out to Italy next week to help with a seminar with some people from El Salvador and India and Italy to these are students who are learning how to build in Bitcoin, and this is a seminar that covers Bitcoin, Lightning, RGB, and that sort of thing. And we're just investing a lot of time and energy and money to making sure that these skills, these technologies take off and have the development energy behind them. And so in order to scale to meet the needs of all the people who will need to use them, I'm bullish on the development side, and a lot of ordinary like people, plebs, will not necessarily get exposure to the development side. I've never been more excited about development on Bitcoin. The other thing I would say is, I've never been more bullish on hyper Bitcoinization, like the concept that, Bitcoin will take over. I mean, like, I'm very much a Bitcoin maximalist. I from the technologies I've seen, I don't really see much necessity or utility or desire to use anything else. And then, as far as like, being able to serve all 8 to 10 billion people, I think Bitcoin through layers will be able to solve for that. And I have very few doubts about that. And so I think, that the Bitcoin future, like the bright orange future, is well within our grasp, so long as we build towards it and we support it. And so, yeah, those are the two points I'd like to.
I absolutely love it. I've been here 2 years and I couldn't agree more. Like the dev fervor right now, what they're calling the Bitcoin Renaissance, it just feels it's so exciting. Yeah, this has been great. Well, just to close it out, then give us some of the obligatory links for what you guys are working on at DIBA, and then maybe to bracket too, because RGB is not really in the common parlance. Like, it's kind of a side community currently. So drop any links or communities or that you would love to shout out. So if people are interested, they can kind of get involved.
Yeah, so just off the top of my head, there's DIBA.io, DIBA.io. That's for our unique digital asset marketplace that will be launching on November 11th. Bitmask.app is how you can go and use our Bitmask wallet. You can also use a beta version of our Bitmask wallet, beta.bitmask.app. If you choose to use that, definitely join our Telegram channel or our Discord channels and let us know. Like, give us feedback on your experience, and like, it really does help us out have feedback and bug reports and just engagement from the community, and even just kudos. That helps us out, get through our day. Then for our people who are unfamiliar with RGB, I would recommend going to rgb.tech. which is the main RGB site. And if that doesn't do it for you, I think a more kind of like practical site also is rgb.info, which has links to all the different RGB wallets and all the different like technical community projects and so it definitely helps to get integrated in the community from like either Telegram or Discord or just different like just talk to people, ask questions, learn more about it.
Perfect. And I'll have all the links below as usual for people, make it easy on you. But man, Hunter, thank you for coming on. This has been super illuminating. I'm sure people are going to love this one, and they're going to like it more once they try DIBA, because it really is a game changer once you try it compared to everything else you're used to in Bitcoin. So yeah, props to you guys for what you guys are building, and thanks for coming on and dropping some knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening this far into the episode. If you found it enjoyable, please do like, subscribe on whatever platform that you're listening on. YouTube does me a huge favor to like and subscribe. Find me on Twitter at Jake Blockchain. Show me some love. I reply to every DM. And if you are a Bitcoin builder that is kind of at the forefront of building new use cases, whether it's L1, Lightning, Stacks, Rootstock, Rollups, Ordinals, BRC20, I want to talk to you. So when I'm not doing this podcast, I am the sourcing partner at the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, where we invest in Bitcoin startups at the earliest stages, give you access to whatever you need, whether it's legal, product, fundraising help, as well as capital. So love to talk to you. You can hit me up. Again, find me on Twitter at Jake Blockchain and shoot me a DM. I'll read everything. Love to talk to you guys. All right. Peace.
Welcome to Built on Bitcoin.
I know that things don't always go your way, but I'll be right here waiting. I've been waiting now. I've been trying to figure out a way to make it out, cause I don't think about